In March 2026, the global energy market ground to a sudden halt. A line of military warships physically blocked the Strait of Hormuz, turning one of the ocean's busiest channels into an impenetrable wall. To see the impact of that closure, look at this chart tracking the economic fallout. The blue line shows commercial shipping volume through the strait dropping 94% almost overnight. In response, the red line shows Brent crude oil prices climbing from $72 a barrel to over $111. This satellite view reveals why the market reacted so violently. At its narrowest point, the shipping lane in the Strait of Hormuz is only 2 miles wide. When that gap closes, 20% of the world's daily oil supply is instantly cut off. A single maritime choke point had effectively frozen the energy supply chain, holding the global economy hostage. On March 10th, Saudi Aramco chief executive Amin Nasser made a disclosure that rewrote the map. Saudi Arabia would abandon the Hormuz route entirely to keep their exports moving. They executed a total logistical reversal. Instead of sending oil east into the Persian Gulf, they diverted 7 million barrels of crude per day across the peninsula toward the Red Sea coast. The results were immediate. The port of Yanbu, which typically handled less than 1 million barrels a day, tripled its export throughput in barely 11 days. This redirection required the mobilization of massive infrastructure built decades ago, a system that was about to meet its first real-world limit. The escape route was a product of the 1980s. In 1981, as tankers burned during the Iran-Iraq War, Saudi leadership recognized that relying solely on the Strait of Hormuz was a strategic liability. Riyadh responded by launching a $180 billion infrastructure offensive, building an overland corridor to the Red Sea. Saudi engineers designed this system as a high-volume contingency. It was held in reserve as a strategic insurance policy for decades, waiting for a crisis that finally arrived in 2026. That historical foresight allowed Saudi Arabia to bypass its own geography when the Gulf became impassable. This is the East-West Pipeline, or the Petroline. It stretches 1,200 kilometers across the desert, connecting the eastern oil fields to the western coast. The system uses 2 parallel steel arteries, a 48-inch and a larger 56-inch line. Together, they move enough crude to supply entire nations. To maintain pressure over that distance, Saudi Aramco operates 30 pumping stations positioned at strategic intervals. Before reaching the coast, the oil must traverse the rugged Hijaz Mountains. This requires pushing millions of barrels of heavy liquid crude up to a staggering elevation of over 1,000 meters. Lifting 7 million barrels of crude over mountain peaks requires precise pressure management and constant maintenance to prevent the pipes from rupturing under the strain. When the blockade entered its second week in 2026, the Petroline hit its emergency maximum of 7 million barrels per day. The decades-old engineering held, delivering record volumes without a single failure. At the Yanbu terminal, 5 supertankers successfully loaded 10 million barrels of diverted oil, providing a critical buffer for the global market. The failsafe worked. Saudi Arabia's infrastructure gamble successfully bypassed the blockade and prevented an immediate collapse of the global energy supply. But the success of the pipeline revealed a new geographic reality. While the oil had bypassed the Strait of Hormuz, the ships leaving the Red Sea were sailing into a different conflict. To reach global markets, these tankers had to pass through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Houthi rebel activity in Yemen had already turned this narrow exit into an active combat zone. Complications mounted immediately as ballistic missiles targeted shipping lanes and drone strikes hit workaround ports as far away as southern Oman. The world's most valuable resource had been moved out of one trap and deposited directly into a second, equally volatile choke point. The map tells the story. The Petroline successfully cleared the blockage at Hormuz, only to meet a secondary choke point at the southern end of the Red Sea. Trading dependence on one strait for another doesn't remove the risk, it moves the vulnerability to different physical bottlenecks. Moving oil out of this new environment now requires constant military protection, with naval coalitions guarding tankers as they move through the narrow channel. Despite the billions spent on engineering and overland routes, the global economy remains tethered to a few specific miles of water. As long as we rely on physical resources, we remain hostage to the map.